The first surveyors that were hired by the Government of Canada to come to Muskoka and survey lines. The government had been trying to find a way from Georgian Bay to the Ottawa River, and they sent a number of explorers here over the years, starting as early as 1700s. They were paranoid about being attacked and they wanted to populate the land. So they sent explorer after explorer, and none of them did find a waterway from Georgian Bay to Ottawa River because there wasn't one. It was right through the middle of Algonquin Park. It was very difficult terrain. There was lots of ideas. Someone wanted to put a canal all the way through with lift locks, but it didn't fly. It was just too far. So the government decided that the better way to populate the land was to have it surveyed, so they could sell lots to people and come and settle the land and create their farms and businesses. They hired two surveyors. One was Hawkins, and I think that was 1835. He surveyed a line from the Severn Bridge area, right up north through to Muskoka. And that survey line now forms a center line of the Wellington Street and streets to the south of the Muskoka River that we know today. Another surveyor then was hired to do an east-west line. And it was done a couple years later, and those two lines intersected directly beneath the abutment of the Wellington Street Bridge over the Muskoka River. From that point where those two lines intersected, surveyors started setting lots and concessions, side road allowances, etc., all over Muskoka. And every survey today, if you go back far enough, they're all focused on that particular intersection of those two original lines in Muskoka that came here in the 1830s. With that in hand, then the government passed an act, Free Grant Land and Homestead Act. And it would encourage people, and then encourage people to come and settle in Muskoka. A great book is written on that called Guidebook and Atlas of Muskoka and Parry Sound. It's a wonderful book, and it still serves as a great historical document. The problem with it, though, is it was a little misleading. It promoted Muskoka and Parry Sound districts wonderfully, but they might have gone a little bit too far in some of their descriptions, because they talked about what great land it was in Muskoka and how fertile the land was. And it was unfortunate in this respect that much of the land in Muskoka was not tillable. It was rock and swamp, heavily treed. But if you remember who was reading this book, that it would be people living in tenement houses and the likes in London, England, or in Scotland or Ireland. And they believed that they would come to this great Muskoka land and have an easy time with build their farms and start their lives over. Some of the things were very misleading in that book, and I quote from a page in it. It is difficult to give an average of the proportion of good land in the district, but we are not overshooting the mark and calling it 60%. 60%, and they're referring there to good tillable land. And be remembered that the objective 40% includes swamps, of which at a trifling cost can be reclaimed and make it the most valuable portions of the farm. Even the rocky portions of this 40% is by no means absolute rock. Much of it would make excellent sheep pasture, though it's pretty tough to plow. And went on. Beyond the intersection of the Dominion and Manitoba streets, the soil is some 40 feet deep. And again, they're referring to topsoil, tillable land. Now, we all know that 40 feet deep is impossible sitting here on that very intersection as we are right now. And then the other fact of the matter, the air they have here is that they say the land is 60% tillable. Well, if you know Muskoka, you know that's ridiculous. If it was 6%, it'd be closer. The rock is also a wonderful storehouse for heat and a reservoir of moisture which it gives out in times of summer Duranus. It also serves to break the winds in all directions and furnish building material for houses. Well, think about that and look at the terrain of Muskoka that we see today. As a result of all that promotion, Muskoka settled quickly, and the people came here expecting wonderful things, and they were walked out in the bush by the Crown land agent, and they were showing a stake in the ground that was come from these early explorers we talked about, and said, here's your 100 acres, go get at it, and they went back to town and left the people there with maybe their families, their rudimentary tools for sure, looking at a forest of trees, and it was very difficult times. Because when they got here, they see the rock that we show here. Now remember, that road has got through that rock, so they went over top of these hills, and that's what they found, rock, rock, rock. Now there were some areas in Muskoka that were good tillable land, and those people were successful in their endeavors. But as one example of the hard times that people received, I have here a document, a letter that was written by the wife of Mr. John Adair. John Adair was a builder. He was here early in the late in the 18th century, maybe 1870 or 80. And his wife suffered through all kinds of hardships. And Mr. Adair built the original building of the Inn at the Falls, the stone block building. And she wrote her memoirs, and this is to her family, of after they left Muskoka, of all the hardship they had here. And it's very difficult time she describes. For example, on one of these pages of this document, she says this: early one morning, a man we knew as Mr. Vincent came over just after breakfast. He and his wife were a strange old couple, and all alone as far as relatives were concerned. They had come from London, England. They were very poor, but very cheerful and optimistic. Well, he came in to tell me that he needed my help. His wife had died, and he was all alone with her. He just left her and came over for me. They were very poor, but they were also very proud as they attempted to make a homestead in this land. I went with the old man and found his wife just laying there dead in her bed. I did not fail him. I straightened out the little body, dressed it for the coffin, and her husband made the coffin for the lady. So you see, in this document also, she talks about their house. They had to line with newspapers to keep the wind from blowing through the cracks. It was difficult times. And when they tried to clear the land, the trees were their enemies. And they struggled with that. They had to clear 5 acres in the first year. That's a lot of land if you're clearing land with the big trees looking at you. After a few years, the man of the house usually went to the lumber camp so he could make some money to pay their bills. And in the lumber camps, they were pretty rough. They worked from daylight to dark every day, even some Sundays. And they came back and then tried to clear another 5 acres during the summer in the next year. So it went on and on. Many gave up in despair and went back down the Muskoka Road, the colonization road, and left to Muskoka and went to other places. Probably the city, some went out west, during those expansion times in the West. Here, an example of the buildings the pioneers built. Log building, and you see the terrain that it's built on, all kind of rocks showing up here and there, and that was in concession 2 of Watt Township near Camel Lake. I can speak about that because my great-grandfather, Adam Veitch, built that building when he settled there in 1872. Very difficult times. Here's another example. My grandfather built this building in Ufford, and that was a stable for our little farm. But things continued on in Muskoka. Those that had good land thrived. The town grew incredibly because of the power of the waterfalls. Hydraulic power was a wonderful thing in those days.